When I asked about my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law looked at me across the dining table, gave a small, indifferent smile, and said, "He's long gone." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her, because those words didn't sound like something a person says about the man she married, the father of her child, the boy I had raised with my own two hands. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the old wall clock in the hallway, the same clock my late husband had bought from a flea market nearly 30 years ago. I remember staring at Rachel, trying to find even the smallest crack in her expression, some sign of grief or confusion or kindness, but there was nothing there. Just calm. Too calm. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and until that evening I believed I understood the people in my family. Daniel was my only son. He was 39, a mechanical engineer who could fix almost anything with a wrench and a little patience. Growing up in Ohio, he used to spend weekends helping his father rebuild old pickup trucks in the garage. Even after my husband passed away 8 years ago, Daniel kept that same steady presence in my life. He called every Sunday morning without fail, always asking if I needed groceries or if the furnace was working properly when winter rolled in. That's why the silence over the past week had been so unsettling. 7 days without a call from Daniel felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain, like a radio station suddenly going quiet in the middle of a familiar song. When Rachel finally invited me over for dinner that Thursday evening, I thought maybe something had happened suddenly, something tragic that she didn't know how to say over the phone. I drove the 45 miles from my small house outside Dayton to their place in Columbus with a tight feeling in my chest the entire way. The early evening air was cool for April, and the sky had that pale gray color that makes the world feel suspended between winter and spring. I rehearsed a dozen possible conversations in my head while I drove. Maybe Daniel had been in the hospital. Maybe there had been an accident at work. Maybe Rachel simply needed help with their daughter Lily while things settled down. But none of those possibilities prepared me for the way Rachel said those 4 words. He's long gone. She said it the way someone might talk about a missed flight or a package that had already been delivered days ago. I noticed then that Daniel's jacket wasn't hanging on the rack by the front door. His muddy work boots were gone too. The framed photo from their wedding that usually sat on the living room shelf had disappeared, leaving behind a faint square of cleaner paint where the sun hadn't touched the wall. I felt a strange chill move through me as I realized something even more unsettling than Rachel's words. Inside that house, it was as if my son had simply been erased. I remained seated at the dining table long after Rachel said those words, trying to understand the strange stillness that had settled over the house. Rachel picked up her glass of iced tea and took a small sip as if nothing unusual had been said. The clink of ice against the glass sounded unusually loud in the quiet room. I looked around again, hoping I had overlooked something, some ordinary detail that would make this evening feel normal. The dining room looked clean, almost too clean, as though someone had carefully removed every trace of Daniel from the space. The place where his favorite baseball cap usually hung by the kitchen doorway was empty. The wooden chair where he always sat during family dinners had been pushed neatly under the table, but the cushion he used for his bad back was gone. Even the small bowl on the counter where he kept his car keys had disappeared. I cleared my throat and tried to keep my voice steady. I asked Rachel what exactly she meant by those words, but she only shrugged her shoulders in a casual way that felt strangely rehearsed. She told me that Daniel had made his own choices and that sometimes people simply moved on. Her tone sounded calm, almost polite, yet there was a distance in it that made my stomach tighten. I asked where he had gone, whether he had called her, whether there was some kind of arrangement that I did not know about. Rachel set her glass down carefully on the table and said that worrying would not change anything. She suggested that I should focus on enjoying dinner and spending time with Lily instead of asking questions that did not matter anymore. That sentence stayed with me. Questions that did not matter anymore. My son had been the center of my life for nearly 4 decades, and now I was being told that asking about him did not matter. The smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen, warm and familiar, yet something about it made the room feel colder. Rachel stood up and began clearing plates that had barely been touched. She moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, opening cabinets and closing drawers in smooth, practiced motions. Watching her, I realized that she was not behaving like someone whose husband had recently died. There were no photographs with black ribbons, no visitors bringing casseroles, No quiet conversations about memorial services. Everything in the house felt strangely organized, as though an entire chapter of life had been packed away and placed neatly out of sight. When Lily walked into the room a few minutes later carrying her school backpack, she smiled and hugged me tightly. Her hug felt warm and genuine, the way children hug when they are happy to see someone they trust. I asked her where her father was, keeping my voice gentle so that it sounded like an ordinary question. Lily hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the kitchen where Rachel was rinsing dishes under running water. Then she looked back at me and said that her father had been working late a lot recently and that he had told her not to worry if he was away for a while. The words were simple, but they landed in my mind like pieces of a puzzle that did not fit together. Rachel had said my son was gone, yet Lily believed he was only away. As I sat there holding my granddaughter's small hand, a quiet realization settled deep in my chest. Something about this story was wrong, and for the first time since arriving at that house, I felt certain that the truth about Daniel had not been told. That night, I drove back to my small house outside Dayton with the radio turned off and the highway stretching dark and quiet in front of me. The drive usually took about 45 minutes, but it felt longer than usual, as if time itself had slowed down. My mind kept replaying every detail from dinner. Rachel's calm voice, the empty spaces where Daniel's belongings used to be, Lily's innocent words about her father working late. None of it fit together. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light I had left on earlier was still glowing softly against the cool spring air. My house had always felt peaceful, but that night the silence inside felt heavier than usual. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, staring at the familiar room where Daniel used to sit on Sunday mornings drinking coffee with me before heading back to Columbus. For years we had kept the same routine. He would arrive around 9 o'clock, usually carrying a box of donuts from the bakery on Main Street, and we would talk about work, about Lily's school, about whatever small projects he was fixing around the house. Daniel had never been the kind of man who disappeared without explanation. That thought kept circling in my mind as I turned on the small lamp near the living room sofa and sat down. I tried to remember the last time we had spoken clearly. It had been 8 days earlier, late in the evening. Daniel had called while I was washing dishes. His voice sounded tired, but there was something else in it too, something tense that I could not quite place at the time. I remembered asking him if everything was all right at home. There had been a short pause before he answered. He said that work had been busy and that Rachel had been dealing with some financial paperwork for the house. At the time I thought nothing of it because Daniel often worked long hours at the engineering firm. But now that conversation felt different when I replayed it in my mind. I walked to the small desk in the corner of my living room where I kept old family photographs and letters. The framed picture of Daniel from his college graduation stood beside a stack of birthday cards he had given me over the years. In the photograph, he was smiling proudly in his blue cap and gown, his arm wrapped around my shoulders as if he was the one taking care of me. Seeing that picture made my chest tighten. Steady, the kind of son who fixed broken fence posts without being asked and called his mother every Sunday without fail. I picked up my phone and opened the last message Daniel had sent me. The text had arrived 2 nights before he stopped calling. It was short, only one sentence, and at the time it had not seemed unusual. But now the words felt strangely important. He had written that if I did not hear from him for a few days, I should not worry, and that sometimes things take time to sort themselves out. But that day it felt like traveling through a fog where every mile brought more uncertainty instead of clarity. Knew about financial decisions or property records connected to Daniel, it would be him. I hesitated for a moment before pressing the call button.